Hello and welcome to the newest episode of the GW Basketball Insiders podcast. I'm here with David Korn, Daniel Frank. We've got big news. GW women's basketball head coach Caroline McCombs has been let go. We've got a lot to discuss. So David, I'm going to throw it over to you to kind of start the discussions with the statement that they released yesterday around this.
So yeah, the official terminology was stepped down. So this is from the official release from GW. Caroline McCombs has stepped down as head coach of GW women's basketball. Director of athletics Michael Lipitz announced today, that was yesterday on Monday. Assistant coach Doug Novak will serve as interim head coach for the duration of this season. We thank Caroline for her leadership over the past 4 seasons, said Lipitz. She invested in her student athletes and represented the program and university with integrity. We wish her every future success. And then here's McCombs' statement. I am very grateful for the opportunity to have led the GW program the last 4 years, as I have poured an enormous amount of love, time, and energy into this program and student athletes. After much thought, it is important to do the same for myself and my family at this time. I wish GW nothing but success moving forward. And then here's Lipitz addressing sort of the future. GW women's basketball has a proud tradition of excellence, including 18 NCAA tournament appearances and 23 combined A10 regular season and tournament titles. We are committed to returning the program to the top of the A10 conference and to national prominence. GW will begin a national search for its next head coach. So Daniel, just sort of, you are the authority, I feel, on GW women's basketball. I actually don't know if there's anyone who is not directly affiliated with the program who knows more than you do. So you are the perfect person to have on and the perfect person to answer this question. What is your sort of instant reaction to this? And, you know, once you get through that, what are some of your maybe takeaways from Caroline McCombs' tenure as head coach of GW?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks guys for having me on. Thrilled to be here. I guess just to kind of give a little bit of background to your statement, I followed the program for 26 seasons. So that's kind of, I've been around for a long time. I've seen some of the really great teams. I've seen some of the not so great teams. My instant reaction to Caroline leaving was rather distasteful. I think it was not a secret that she was leaving at the end of the season, that we would be fired, essentially. But the way this comes across to me is her quitting on the team with 2 games left in the regular season, and that really rubs me the wrong way. Look, I understand that if, there's extenuating circumstances, if, she's got stuff going on in her personal life, obviously that takes precedence and that's important. But I feel like it's a different situation if we're like in December and she decides to step away for whatever reason it is. We're here in the last week of February. They just had senior night. There are 2 regular season games left. There's one literally 24 hours from the time of this recording. And for her to just quit on the team is certainly how this comes across to me, with 2 games left in the regular season, feels really, really bad.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The kind of sense that talking to various different people, and sort of the sense that I got is she stepped down because she was sort of told that if she didn't, she would be, fired, which, doesn't necessarily surprise me. And I think that's probably if you're looking at it from that perspective, then that's, I don't know, maybe the noble thing to do, or the thing to maybe save face a little bit. But if it's kind of an open secret that that's what's happening, then I don't really think it makes much of a difference. And the thing I'm curious about is, I just know sometimes how these contracts work. The impression I'm under is these coaches, you should make them fire you because then you get your full payout.
Well, the thing is, we don't know about any of the details because GW is a private university.
Yeah.
The only thing we know about Caroline McCombs' contract, Daniel, I don't know if you know any different, but the only thing that we know publicly is that she accepted an extension at the beginning of last season.
Correct.
That is the only thing that is publicly available. Again, because GW is a private university, you can't submit FOIA for them. I know that has been done at George Mason and a lot of other places to get those contract details, and that's something that isn't available at GW.
I was under the impression she was under an initial 4-ish year contract, and the extension was probably an additional 1 or 2 years. Don't quote me on that specific numbers, but like in that ballpark, I think was about the terms of the deal.
So it would be safe to say that maybe she had 1 or 2 more years left under contract.
She was certainly not a lame duck coach. We'll put it that way. She definitely had at least another year or two on her
Like,
deal. If not
hypothetically, if she had success, there would be no conversations about another. Like, she would just be safe.
Yeah, no, I don't think if GW goes, even if they finish like 10th this year in the Atlantic 10, she maybe buys herself another year. But just the way, especially the way the conference play started. I mean, they started 1-8 this season in A10 play, which is the worst in the 48, 49 years that GW's been in the Atlantic 10, is like now the only founding member basically left. 1-8 to start everyone knew coming into this season, this was a make or break year for Caroline McCombs. I don't think that was a secret.
No, it was not a secret at all. Yeah.
And to just drop, and she clearly scheduled for one reason or another, a very easy non-conference schedule, as she's done her previous 3 years here. And there's, we can have discussions about scheduling and beyond that, but when it came time to actually play teams that have an average net higher than 300, they started 1-8 and didn't fare very well even beyond that.
Yeah.
So, Daniel, my next question for you is sort of, what are your, when you look back on the Caroline McCombs tenure, sort of what will you think about this era of GW women's basketball?
A disappointment again. I think we all look, her first season, I think everyone understands your first season as a head coach, you're in a new program, you're going to have some growing pains. She went 13-18, 4-11, finished 12th in the Atlantic 10. I think we all accepted that, it's not ideal, but it's a first year. And then year two, I think, really got a lot of people optimistic. They went 18-13. They finished 7th in the Atlantic 10. They reached the quarterfinals. There's the memorable Mia Laxagala game winner against Duquesne in the second round of the A10 tournament in Wilmington. And I think a lot of people were really optimistic after that season. And then the way that the last 2 years have gone, last season and this season, it wasn't just that they were losing, it was they were playing really awful basketball. And that's not the players or the efforts of any of the players or anything. It's just you look at the numbers and they're not playing good basketball.
Yeah. They just didn't have any juice. They had no juice. Like I was never like super pumped to watch a GW women's basketball game. There was a game at LaSalle at the beginning of conference play. It was actually the one game that they won during that 1-8 start, where I was like, okay, I'm kind of in Philadelphia area, and I'm like, well, I could go to this game. Either that or I could stay home and watch football. Like, this team doesn't have any juice. This team they're not fun. They just don't.
Well, and one of the marks of GW women's basketball, if you go back 20 odd years, is they were always high speed and athletic. And that's something that I think we can all agree this team doesn't have, and none of her teams have had here. And frankly, you can go back to the Jen Rosati era of what she had 5 seasons here. The frustration, I think, with Jen Rosati is everyone knew she was a good defensive coach. And I think we would say the same about Caroline McCombs. GW's defense is ranked in the top 5 in defense in the Atlantic 10 almost every single one of those 9 seasons. It's the offense that has always been the issue for these last 9 years.
Oh, yeah.
And the team just doesn't allow themselves to be competitive as a result of that.
So, I mean, I agree. So after that 22-23 season, I also had a lot of optimism for the program again. Great wins. I think maybe the signature moment, 2 signature moments of McCombs' tenure were, again, like that Mia Laxagala game winner. If anyone wants to see my call of that, I think it's still my pinned tweet.
It was electric.
It's a great call.
My only successful buzzer beater call. I'm not technically a buzzer beater, but like last second game winner call of my WRGW career. So I'm still very proud of that. And then the win over Fordham at the start of conference play, which I think was probably her best win. Again, like best opponent win. And that left a lot of people thinking, GW can be for a top 4, but then they sort of fell off at the end of the year anyway. But after that year, I was thinking, you know what? Like, this could work, right? You're a defensive juggernaut. You have enough scoring, and that'd be kind of a fun way to win. But again, that offense never really materialized. I think she got sort of bailed out that year by having 2 like truly elite scorers in Mia Laxagala and Nia Robertson. And without those 2 perimeter scorers who could create their own shots and, sort of bypass her stalling offensive strategy, whatever even it was, I couldn't figure out any sort of discernible strategy to her offense watching it. It was like, it really showed that there wasn't really a path to success at this level of basketball. And so I agree with everything you guys have said. It was tough. And one point I want to bring up, I'm not sure this is necessarily, a part of her firing or part of the calculus of this decision, but I think something that was really unfortunate about her tenure as well is that, she was the coach of GW women's basketball during a pivotal time for the sport. And, I think she really failed to go above and beyond in marketing the team and, putting them on, trying to get any sort of media attention on them. I know me and Liam have had our issues working with her when we were in part of the student media. And, you just like, I just, again, I don't know if this is necessarily fair on our parts to say, but I think they really, again, failed to capitalize on a pivotal moment. And McCombs, I think, could have done a lot more, been out in the community doing stuff like that. And maybe she was and we weren't seeing it. I don't know. But again, I that's just something that has left me thinking a lot, that maybe GW could have done more to sort of just grow their program right now that they just didn't do.
Yeah.
Well, and I think kind of building off of that too, I think McCombs' tenure is going to be judged in a lot of ways as kind of a mirror of Vanessa Blair-Lewis at George Mason. Yeah. They were hired the exact same week, I think. And, prior to both their hirings, I think they were very similar in attendance numbers. I mean, GW certainly has the history, but obviously under Rosati, attendance really faltered. And George Mason does not have any history prior to Vanessa Blair-Lewis of attendance or success of any variety. And now George Mason, I believe, is second in the conference in attendance. And obviously that comes with winning. But when you compare the trajectory of the two programs, obviously what Vanessa has done at George Mason speaks for itself. But I do think that was a factor in why Caroline was viewed partially through the lens that she was. GW expects a certain standard of success here. And honest to God, what I truly feel like was the nail in the coffin, not that it really needed one, was the game at George Mason this year. Because in the first meeting between Mason and GW, Mason took it to GW for 40 minutes. GW made a run, made it 10 at halftime, but that was really the game. The second meeting was a completely different story. I mean, GW took a 5-point lead into halftime in Fairfax. It was the first time, I think, all season Mason had been trailing other than the Maryland game. And then the second half, I mean, to get outscored 66-20, I feel like was just like the punctuation on the vastly different directions of the two different programs.
And Daniel, you got a chance to speak with McCombs after that game, right?
Yeah, I did. It was the first time in the 3-4 years that she'd been in GW that I was able to get her after a road game.
Yep. Yeah. So again, that's like part of what I said.
Difficulties. Yeah, some of the shortcomings with that were because of the former SID, who was kind of garnered a reputation for not making her super available. But I just don't think that was really her. It wasn't really in her. She doesn't have that sort of thing that a lot of these coaches have, where they want to run their program. She just wanted to coach basketball. She just wanted to do the defensive drills. Were either of you there on the it was like the intro thing? It was her first year, and they go out there, and it's the men's team does a few drills and they're shooting the ball and whatever. And the women's team goes out there and there's not even a ball on the floor. They're literally doing defensive sliding, defensive switching drills. And it was just it was hysterical, because you're here, you have Jamie and Christian on the other side, who is very much known as a player's coach, and Joe Bannister.
Polar opposites.
Super high energy guy.
Yeah. And it was a man who was born to be a motivational speaker.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was just like David said, polar opposites of one side of the floor. You have Joe Bannister throwing the ball off the backboard and putting it through his legs and dunking, and and then the other side, they're yelling out switches and.
Hey, you know what? I would take a Mayo Otawa screen over any Joe Bannister dunk pretty much any day.
I don't know.
I'm just saying.
Bannister dunks were really, really fun.
I would take that.
Can we talk about her? So another thing with McCombs is, which I think was probably the biggest issue from my vantage point, was she didn't develop talent. There was very little talent development. You bring in these players that seemed promising, or even players like Nia Robertson, or I guess it's probably a little too early to, for a judgment on Gabby Reynolds, but a lot of these players, that group of Jen Rosati players that she was able to retain, Maya Taiwo, Faith Blesson, Essence Brown, they didn't really develop. Like they didn't get, you kept waiting every single year. It was like Faith Blesson was going into her grad year, and there were people talking about, oh, well, if she can make that next step. It's like, this
and
is
she was still just sort of that stretch four.
This is her fifth year playing college basketball.
Like Taiwo was still the same, again, dominant defensive player and rebounder, but again, very limited
offensively never
skill set. Instead of being, unless she was like right under the hoop, which is tough for someone who was undersized to begin with.
Yeah. And I mean, I think even to look at, again, yes, I agree. Too early to make an assessment on Gabby Reynolds. She hasn't even completed one season. But I think one of the things we saw early on this season is she was a tremendous scorer out of the gates. When opposing coaches made adjustments on her, GW didn't have an answer to that. We didn't have a way of, okay, we got to run her off the screens. We're going to take her off the ball and make her a two guard. There was no adjustment to, okay, she's become one of the focal points of the scout that the opponent's going to have. How do we get her shots? There was no answer.
Yeah. So do we think Gabby Reynolds stays?
I have no idea. I feel like there's just no way to know. I feel like women's players are typically less, like, I feel like there's a little bit less turnover, but you just never know. Like if a new coach comes in and, a lot of these young players, Gabby Reynolds and others just aren't really buying what they're selling, then they're going to leave. Gabby Reynolds is good enough to play.
I feel like there's no shot. Because
there's not that she stays?
No, because she was like a high major recruit. Like the fact that she came to GW was a shock. So I don't think she came for the Hilternship opportunities. So I feel like there's got to have been a reason why she came here. So I feel like she's still young enough and has enough eligibility where she could go after a high major opportunity still. And I feel like it would be pretty silly of her to gamble on a new coach somewhere where she already went that she was sort of above their caliber of usual players. So I feel like she's as good as gone. And you know what? Good for GW for not letting that like blind them into giving McCombs another year. Because I truly think, or again, we know this was like, sorry for not using the exact language that the report used, but we know that she was not good. Anyways,
they parted ways.
Parted ways. Yes. I'm glad that GW seemed okay with this decision from McCombs, even though this likely means that you lose Reynolds, because I think it's time to cut part ways. And another year, like losing the player will suck. Again, if she stays, great. Like I'll be psyched, but it's time to cut.
Well, I think the other factor, frankly, too, is not to put a strike on any single one of the players, because I've interacted with them, almost all of them. They're all lovely people. But from a basketball standpoint, okay, you're going to finish either 12th or 13th this year, depending on what happens the last two games. It's not like you're losing. It's not like the fall off could be that deep, because there's only, as of next year, 2 more spots to go down. Like there's only going to be 14 teams in the Atlantic 10 next year, dropping from 12th to 13th. Like whatever the new coach brings in, they're going to bring in their own new people as it is. And I don't feel like, you're in a situation where it's like, oh, there's no one that I really can't lose, because it's not like they were doing much from just a wins-losses perspective as it is.
So Daniel, you mentioned the new coach. Let's just sort of get started there. Before we hit any names, I know we've all been looking at this, but not necessarily naming any names, just like historically and based on the current state of like the sport, what do you think a potential candidate could look like no name, but like just looking at a resume, what do you think that type of candidate would be? Who you think GW could target?
I think, first of all, the most important quality of a new coach is win percentage coming in. I mean, you look at this, clearly what GW is looking at is wins and losses, among other things. Yes, product on the floor significantly matters. And it's not just it's not that they lost games, it's how they were losing games under McCombs. I think a coach that, like, you look at the Joe McEwens and Jonathan Sippes, they have win percentage over 700. There was a time GW could pull, like when Sippes came here, he was one of the lead assistants under Muffet McGraw at Notre Dame. Like that was the quality of coach that you were able to go after. You're probably not going to get that now from how far the program has fallen. But I think winning, success, and culture are the main traits that GW needs in a coach right now. Just to get things turned in the right direction again. It'll be interesting to kind of see what direction they go in. And obviously we'll get to names here in a minute. But I think we all would agree that this next hire could arguably be one of the most important hires that GW women's basketball has ever made. Because, one bad hire, it happens. Two bad hires, it's not a good look. If GW swings and misses on this next hire, you become a bad job.
Yep. Well, and it's funny you mentioned bad job because I saw a tweet yesterday from some I followed the account. He does his name's Mark Schindler. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He does WNBA draft and scouting, and he basically came out and said that GW is a bad job. He said DC is a tough place to recruit for GW because of the high academic standards and stuff like that. I'm not sure I fully buy into that because I don't know, coaches have had success at GW. But I just found it interesting because it was funny during the men's coaching search. It was all you would hear is, oh, well, GW is a sneaky good job. Oh, well, it's in the DMV. Oh, there's a great kind of recruiting base, all this different stuff. So I was just like, I'm not sure I totally buy that it's a bad job. Right?
I would completely disagree that it's a bad job because you look, there are multiple ways that you can measure as a coach what a good job or a bad job is. So you can look at, will this program want to keep me long-term if I win well? Will they be patient with me? Are there springboard opportunities? And you can say yes to all of those things. Look, if you're a young coach and your goal is to get to the Power 5, GW's had two coaches, Joe McEwen and Jonathan Sippets, both left to go to the Big Ten. If your goal is to have longevity, God knows Joe McEwen was here for 19 years and he was beloved. We would have given him a lifetime contract if that's what he wanted. If you want patience, GW gave Jen Rosati 5 seasons. They gave Caroline McCombs 4. Yes, one less. Maybe we weren't the most patient with Caroline McCombs, but I think we all understand why.
I don't think any serious basketball coach would fault that.
Correct. Yeah, it's the transfer portal era. It's sort of different.
I think anyone who is looking at this, you know what? It's reasonable to have a 4-year tenure under these circumstances.
Yeah. And not only that too, when you look at this, I think one of the biggest factors that needs to be considered in terms of a quality of a job is expectations from administration. Because look, we've talked about, this is an important moment for women's basketball across the board. But even beyond that, there are still tons of programs out there where they have women's basketball to have women's basketball and their own expectations. We can talk about that within the Atlantic 10. We can talk about that across the region. There are programs that they accept a certain level of, we're not going to be contending for titles, but we have a team and it's fun. That will never become the case at George Washington with women's basketball. The expectations are you hang banners here, you make NCAA appearances, you make postseasons. And when that has happened once in 9 years, there is motivation to get this thing turned around that you don't have at other programs, frankly. And when the community support, when this program wins, is arguably you put that against any other mid-major in the country.
Well, yeah, DC likes women's basketball. That's not the issue. The Mystics draw great. I've been to a lot of Mystics games, and, atmosphere there is awesome. Maryland draws very well. It's not an issue that and you get, like you're saying, George Mason, they've had great attendance this year. That's not an issue, regionally. There is the potential for regional support. Again, a lot of, youth, girls basketball, super easy to get them involved too if you want. That's not an issue here. So I think that's a great point you brought up, Daniel. Okay, so we laid out what sort of why this job could be appealing. Let's hit some names. I think that's what people are listening to this for. And Daniel, I don't know if you've published. I saw you published a few names in your A10 Talk article, but let's go a little more in depth here. Give us a few people who have caught your eye, who you think would definitely be on the list and could be potential fits here.
Well, my first choice, and I've been a little bullish about this just privately to people. I think Becky Burke at Buffalo absolutely deserves a look. And now, look, I have Louisville connections. My uncle played for the men's basketball program. I have reasons to, and I follow Becky Burke as a player, so I have reasons to like her beyond just, her name. But she's currently, she played in a women's Final Four in 2009 under Jeff Wall. She's got the pedigree of a background as a great player. under a great program. But what she's done at Buffalo, I think, speaks for itself. And I talked about GW is going to look at win percentage of an incoming coach. She's got a career win percentage of 651. She's currently leading Buffalo to a 22-4 record in the MAC, where, sorry, UMass, it's not easy to win in the MAC. You're not going to be a multi-bid league. And I think she's certainly a coach that has been in the game long enough. She's still on the younger side. She's not going to be pushing 60 or whatever, but she's a coach that would be looking to move up.
Yeah. She's only 35. So she's not just like on the younger side. Like, she's young. She's like probably like one of the younger candidates that they will be looking at. So she's won everywhere she's been. You mentioned her name and I looked at her. She's won at UC Upstate. She's won at Charleston in West Virginia in D2. She's won at Embry-Riddle in the NAIA. That's someone you want. You want someone who just wins no matter what. She's won at Buffalo. I'm obviously not intimately familiar with the kind of resources and, whatever situation at Buffalo, but like, I know at least for men's, like that was a job that I think 2 years ago, there were like 5 people that turned it down. So like, this is not like in place where everyone goes and wins. So, and she's got enough of the kind of regional connections. She's from like Lackawanna County, PA. It's like near Scranton. So I think she would be a good pick, who's a kind of a proven entity who'd be looking to make that jump up.
So Daniel, how psyched would you be for a Louisville grad?
I would be thrilled about it. And not only that, there is a recent precedent for the UVL to GW pipeline, because Sydney Zambrata transferred from Louisville to play here under Jen Rosati. So, wouldn't it be completely off the wall? Moving on to the next choice, I guess, looking down the list. And I'm not ranking these in a specific order. These are just some names that I've compiled.
Well, because again, there's no info. Like
correct. It's still mid-season. All these coaches are still playing.
Exactly. This is all speculation. I don't know if any names have been leaked on any Discords or anything right now. But again, as far as we know, this is all pure speculation. So nothing sourced here.
I think Bill Ferrer Jr. from Florida State, I think, is going to get a look. He was an assistant here under Jonathan Sippes. He's gone plenty of other places in the last several years. Now the Power 5 level. He's moved around a whole lot. But he's currently at Florida State. They're having a really nice season. I think there's a lot of knee-jerk reaction for folks to look at Jonathan Sippes himself. I don't think that's super likely, mainly just because they're like 5-20 or something this year, Western Carolina. He's not done enough there that I think the boosters will be like, "Ooh, yeah, we want him back," because he hasn't gone back to winning since he left here. But I think going to the Jonathan Sippes tree wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing in the world for GW. And I think certainly it seems like there's interest from Ferreira to GW from what I gather. So that would be, I think, an interesting name.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's it's one that you've seen thrown around because he has that GW connection. He was an assistant here from 2013 to 2015, and they had a lot of success. And they went to the third round of the WNIT. They set a program record for wins. He worked with Jonquel Jones. And you're right. He has bounced around a bunch. He was at St. John's as the associate head coach for a year. He was at New Mexico. He was at Florida. Before GW, he was at Hofstra and Central Michigan. So he's jumped around a bunch. 44 years old. So he's sort of right in that kind of window that a lot of coaches tend to jump up to the head job. But I think he would be a great pick. But
yeah, I like the high major experience as well.
Yeah,
that is something that I am very much looking for. Is high major experience.
I mean, this is for a school like GW, men's and women's. I mean, the classic thing is, do you go for the low major head coach or the high major assistant?
Yeah.
And I think that at this point, I really wouldn't hate to have someone come in here who's seen like the way a legit program, not that low major programs aren't legit, but like maybe has a bit more of like a professional attitude towards it. Has maybe more experience working with some of the bigger names in the sport. And I think that could be something that's really valuable to sort of get this program back on the right track.
Yeah, I think if you can find someone who has experience at the high major level, but also some experience at the mid-major level as an assistant, which Bill Ferrara does, W Hofstra, New Mexico, I think that's sort of the perfect combination. So I think he would be a great candidate, and I'm sure he's a name that you'll hear a lot more over the next few weeks. Just
yeah, and there's the direct link as well, which I
Yeah.
think is going to be impossible to ignore.
Yep.
Moving down the list, next I got Annie Messier from Lehigh. She's a name I've seen on a couple other people's lists, so I find that interesting. Because mostly when I started compiling this list a few weeks ago, because full disclosure, as any, I think, good journalist does, had started compiling a Caroline McCombs leaves GW article in anticipation of what I thought might become an eventuality. I didn't have the article fully fleshed out yesterday when the news broke, so I kind of, this list didn't fully become as full fleshed out as it might have become. But I did find it interesting that other people were throwing this name around as well. She's a former Princeton guard who has been at Lehigh or around Lehigh for 6 seasons now. She's, I think, been the head coach for 4 and was previously an assistant. She's moved around a few times. But they're currently having a 23-4 season, and she's had a good trajectory at Lehigh. I think they had 17 wins last season. The year before that, I think they had like 12 or 13, somewhere in that neighborhood. So you see a clear trajectory of what she's building at the Patriot League level. And I do think it's interesting, kind of bring up your point, Liam, about the mid-major versus the high-major experience. I don't think GW is going to touch the America East with a 10-foot full. Just because, look, we've gone to the Northeast with our last 2 hires. I imagine that GW is going to be looking for a slightly different league, a different style of play. And I think Lehigh plays a higher tempo style, which I think is probably more what GW is going to be looking for. But I think she's an interesting name that I've seen thrown around. She's young, but she's, again, right at the age that you were describing, Liam, of, she could make this jump.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's a great point about, like, stylistically who you want as well. And I think it could be a fair assumption that GW is looking to get as stylistically far away as pounding the stone as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's got that Ivy League experience too. And especially recently, the Ivy League might get 3 bids this year?
There are 3 teams that are still legitimately on the bubble for the Ivy.
Yeah. So I've got a few Ivy coaches that are on my.
I feel like an Ivy would be a great step.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great comparison for GW, I think, from an academic perspective.
The problem is, I don't know.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily.
Well, comparatively to, if we're comparing,
totally.
where does GW fall between, Princeton and, Florida State? I think GW, we would agree, is probably
That's
closer.
true. And GW is still in play for, the recruits who, want an academic experience.
Correct.
And so, yes, this is true. But that just made me laugh.
Yeah. Listen, I'll take it.
Look, I'm not trying to bash Florida State. My girlfriend is in a love of Florida State. I'm not trying to bash it. I'm just making a comparison here.
No, that was fine. Let's do one that I don't think anyone could disagree with. Arizona State. There we go.
There we go. I got one more name that I published in my article.
Yeah.
And then I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on who you guys have had your eye on. This is a very off-the-wall pick, and I'm not certainly advocating that she's the best choice for GW, but I think Stephanie Gately is an interesting name to consider. She's got a little bit of baggage. She led Fordham to the NCAA tournament and coached Fordham for a number of years. I don't know if we ever fully found out the circumstances around her departure from Fordham, but there was a cloud of dust, shall we say, about how she left and why she left and what have you. But she's gone to Fairleigh Dickinson and done very, very well. I know we're not touching the Northeast, but I think it's interesting, just a coach with Atlantic 10 championship experience is around and out there. And so I think because of that, I threw on the list as just a wild card pick.
I mean, those Fordham teams are pretty good.
Yeah.
And Fordham's a tough place to win. We've seen that. So I kind of like that one. Again, A10 experience, like we mentioned. But again, we don't know the baggage. So.
Yeah. I mean, she's 13-0 in conference play this year. She's killing it at
Fairleigh Dickinson, also not an easy place to win.
Oh my God.
No.
Basically an impossible place to win.
Yeah.
But
maybe
5 years old.
We talk bad jobs. That's maybe one of the worst in the country.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not as enthusiastic about Stephanie Gately as I am about some of the other names you mentioned. But she has a lot of head coaching experience. If you're going for someone who can be reliably can lead a program. I mean, she's been a head coach for basically right since she
for like 30 years.
Yeah.
And that's the school's thought is, okay, you don't want an up-and-comer, you don't want a mid-major, or high major associate. That's the other avenue, is you go for the really experienced coach that, may not coach you for 10 years, but certainly has experience.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I meant to mention earlier that I think is interesting is looking at who Michael Lipitz, the GWAD, hired at UIC for their women's job. And he hired Ashleen Bracey, who was the associate head coach at Missouri. He's from Chicago area. She's from Oak Lawn. I always get them confused.
None of us are Chicago people, so.
My girlfriend is from one of those two places, and I consistently confuse it with the other place. Anyway.
Well, you might be in trouble right now.
Yeah, hopefully she has gotten bored by this point in the episode.
She's listening at 36 minutes into the GW Women's Basketball Coaching
Put a ring on it.
You gotta keep her. You gotta win her.
But anyway, a high major associate head coach or assistant, kind of who had Chicago area ties. And just for what it's worth, she's been basically 500. She's been okay at UIC. I don't really know the details of if that's a super difficult job or that's an easy job or
it's not a great job.
Yeah. But she's been about 500. She's actually been to the women's NIT or the WBIT, I think both of her first 2 years. So anyway, just thought that was something to mention, and I think might factor into, what the profile is that they look for. And I do think it's going to be a high major assistant. I kind of hope it's a high major assistant. You've had these last few hires have been, these low major head coaches. And like, we saw how that went. Like, I want an up and comer. I want someone that's gonna, that has some juice, bring some excitement. So the name that I have, my number one name, probably up there with Bill Ferrara, is Corey McNeil, who is currently at North Carolina. He is the assistant at North Carolina. He was the associate head coach at East Carolina for the last 5 years. Was the associate head coach for I forget his wife's first name, but him and his wife met when they were working together at Virginia in like 2011, and they worked on the same staff ever since. She got a head coaching job at Hartford. He went along with her. She got a head coaching job at East Carolina. He went along with her, and this is his first year. He's joined the North Carolina staff. And this is his first year in 15 years or however many years that he has not been on her staff. But I think that he's from Baltimore. He's coached at Georgetown. Like I said, he coached at Virginia, coached at Coppin State. He's been at places that have performed impressive turnarounds at sort of different levels. So I really think that he should get a look. North Carolina is pretty good this year. They're, top 10 projected 3 seed. So that would be my name. That's kind of the name that as I've done more research, I've started to fall in love with.
So Liam, that's really interesting that you sort of looked back at Lipitz's previous decision-making, because this is Lipitz's first real moment. Exactly. Yeah. This is the first big thing. Cause I'm really interested to see how this goes, to see the resources put into it, to see how big they're willing to go, because I think a big thing right now has been, the amount of investment that the university has in athletics. You have a relatively new president, you have a new AD, to see what they're willing to do with this hire, I think is going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah. Daniel, I think you're frozen. I'm going to add you back here. Oh,
there we go.
He's back.
Sorry, folks.
We can just keep going. I think that was fine.
Yeah, no, we'll just keep going. I also looked at the men's basketball coaches that he hired. None of them, he hasn't hired a coach, at least in basketball, that has been wildly successful. So I don't know. I trust him to make a hire, but he's not like one of these ADs that hasn't this reputation of like every single hire they make is a home run hire. So I think they're going to use Parker Executive Search. That is what UIC used in their men's
GW's used them too.
Yeah, and GW's used them in the past. So it says on their website that they finish coaching searches in 10 to 14 days. So,
I mean,
whatever
if you could get a head start on this and make one of the first hires of the offseason, I think that would be a huge win.
The problem is if you're hiring a coach, like a high major assistant, whether it's Florida State or North Carolina, like what happens if North Carolina makes a Final Four?
You're going to have to wait at least a month for them. Yeah.
Yeah. Then you're waiting and waiting. It's
but you can still have those conversations. Like with Caputo, pretty much the second
that's fair.
They lost to Kansas, he finalized the deal. Like it's not like you're not having these conversations. Like I think it is naive of us to pretend that isn't the reality.
But then the coaches need to bring in a coaching staff and recruit players and like all this different stuff. So, again,
this is year one. I would be comfortable waiting for the right person.
Yeah.
If they identify that person early on, I'm not going to worry about that.
Yeah. And I think there won't be as many unless like there's a mass exodus, which maybe there will be from kind of the players on the team. They're a younger-ish team. They have a relatively younger nucleus. So I wouldn't be shocked if there's not that many open spots, especially if the coach is kind of able to come in and tell the team like, hey, this is my plan. And a lot of them buy into it. So
I think it's interesting. I mean, I think ultimately it's going to come down to who GW hires in terms of roster turnover. Because I do think there are a few pieces that, I mean, look, most of GW's roster is previously transferred into GW. So I think there's precedence that they may transfer again. But I think also they may be willing to hear out, coach. I think we've seen around the A10, there have been other programs that have done a pretty good job of retaining a fair amount of, the previous talent. And I think GW is a compelling enough place. I mean, look, they believed enough in it to come here in the first place under a coach that, certainly she can recruit well. I don't think we would say Caroline can't recruit. But look, I mean, depending on who it is, I think you could make a compelling case to stay at GW and say, hey, let's see this thing through.
Yeah. Daniel, I have one more name that I think you might have some thoughts about. What about Geniat Identiton? Former GW assistant under Jen Rosati, took the Colgate job, has been at Colgate this is her fourth year, made it to I guess it's called the Super 16, the WNIT.
Mm-hmm.
And she's having a decent amount of success this year, although she signed an extension through 2029. So, she was at GW 2018 to 2021. So just a name I saw that I kind of want to throw out there because she's 41 years old. She's also kind of in that thing, and she has the GW connection.
Yeah. My gut feeling is run away from a Jen Rosati connection. And that's no hate, no shade to Jen Rosati as a person. I think just from a wins and losses perspective, GW clearly tried to move on from her.
Yeah.
Tried to go in a different direction, didn't work. I would be surprised if we went back to the Jen Rosati coaching tree. That said, I mean, certainly what she's done at the Ivy League level, I think speaks for itself. Columbia's had some good seasons.
Colgate.
I'm sorry.
No, but I mean, sort of similar looking high academic, Patriot League. So, I just figured I'd throw it out. That was one that I found like minutes before we started recording.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an interesting name. I think at this point, anything's on the table for GW.
Yeah.
All right. So one thing I also want to address is that I think that it's not worth really taking any time to think about any internal hires. I think they all have McCombs connections. I think GW wants a clean slate. And I just think that's a conversation I think people will try and bring up. And I don't think it's really worth considering at this point.
What if they go into the A10 tournament and they make it to the championship? Or they no, I'm not saying that's going to happen.
This isn't like a UMass men's basketball situation with Matt McCall, where it's he was still there, but you knew he was gone. No, she is gone. This team is the most lame duck team that could exist.
Are we going to get a David situation? I
think these players are all just going to be trying to do their best to set themselves up for their next destination.
Yeah,
I mean, I do think it I do think it's possible JB wins a game in the A10 tournament. I mean, teams, when things like this happen, you see one of two things. Either they completely fall apart or they rally together and string together a few wins. I mean, it's a really interesting point in the season because we've got 2 games left. You know, UMass has been very good this season, but they've been vulnerable at times. And Rhode Island's been inconsistent, but certainly been trending well lately. And very much will be playing possibly for a double bye on the last day of the season. But if GW, it seems like in 8 out of 10 scenarios, gets Loyola Chicago, they did beat them. They split the season series with them. You know, it's possible that GW could win a game in Henrico if, you know, the girls decide to get motivated together and, you know, really rally around their interim coach. You know, I could see it. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we've gone 45 minutes on this. If you're still listening, and we say this every time, but props to you. Daniel, just like one last concluding thought on what we've talked about today, McCombs' tenure, you know, the way this all went down, anything like that. If there's one last thing you want to leave the people with, what would it be?
Yeah, you know, I don't wish ill will towards Caroline. I mean, again, you know, I came out with a reaction yesterday on Twitter that I think was, you know, a little reactionary. Look, I don't like the way that she's left the program. I think it leaves a really bad taste in my mouth personally. But ultimately, at the end of the day, for GW women's basketball moving forward, you're turning the page on this. You know, you've had 9 years of so-so basketball. I think that my feeling right now is what happens over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, however long this coaching search goes, you know, this is a very pivotal moment for GW women's basketball. The next hire needs to be, if not a home run hire, a very solid pick. We need to get GW women's basketball moved back in the right direction. And it'll be interesting to see what direction they go in.
Yeah. Big test for big kind of first test for Michael Lipitz, like we said. So I'm excited. I don't know. It should be fun. Let's try and
we feel more optimistic now than we have for the past few years. So
yeah. I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
New era.
If anyone's listening and you've got any info or anything, hop into the DMs, send any of us a message. We're we're trying to be on the forefront of this coaching search. I'm not sure how.
If not us, who else?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. so there you go. All right. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on. Everyone, make sure to follow him on, or follow them on X, the Everything app. Are you on Blue Sky too?
No, not yet.
I'm on, but
I hate Twitter, but I have to stick with it because all the coaches and the players are still here.
Yeah, well, that's sort of the problem. I tried to get onto Blue Sky, and I'm like, I have an account, but I don't really.
Yeah, Sam, Blue Sky's dead. I don't like it.
Yeah.
So I tried to manufacture some stuff earlier in the year. Didn't really work. Anyway, all right. If you're still sticking around, then you're a complete sicko. Yeah, we'll talk.